Welcome everybody to our December Higher Education Action Team call and to this very special final edition of the year, which is our Climate Career Connections panel. And today we're going to be hearing from three folks who are working in the regenerative and climate smart, climate friendly ag space, coming at it from all different angles, which is also, I think, really exciting and part of what makes this conversation so powerful today. So we would typically spend some time getting to know each other. Folks who joined for our orientation call had a little bit more opportunity to do that. But today, since we do have this star-studded panel joining us, I'd love for us just to give them an idea of who's in the room by having you all share in the chat your name, pronouns, where you're based, what university you're attending if you are a student, and if you've ever joined a higher ed action team call before. Of course, you are welcome if this is your first call or your 100th call. We love to have you. So thank you, especially for making some time for those of you who are students in the midst of final season. I know this is always one of the hardest action team calls to make every year. So it's great to see as many of you on here as we have tonight. Before we jump into the panel, I think it's helpful to just recap for everybody who is joining for either the first time or generally come but miss the last meeting. In November, for our last higher ed action team call, we had a great session facilitated and hosted by our Mid-Atlantic Climate Advocacy Fellow, Sam Block. And Sam shared with us a bit about her experience working as a legislative assistant in Congress and what she learned about most effective ways to contact and communicate with Congress. So I would love it if anybody is interested who was on that call. I know a couple of you were. If you want to come off mute and just say like one thing that really stuck out to you from that call. And you can raise your hand if you'd like to share something. Go for it, Philip.
Yeah, I thought the call was pretty cool. I think one thing that really stood out was how there is a lot of strategy to being effective, to getting members of Congress to listen to you. And I think this applies for people who are not just in the federal office, but also state and local office. And just seeing that there is that strategy kind of, I think, can make us better at able to craft effective campaigns going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you were not available to attend that meeting, but you'd like to see the recording, you can find the recording link on the event page on our action team. And I'm pretty sure it's also, there's a link to our YouTube channel for all of our recent recordings on the link in our bio and Instagram as well. So that might be a shorter route to get there. So thank you all for sharing in the chat a bit about who you are. And now it's my privilege to give a nice warm welcome to our three guest speakers tonight. We have Katharine, Harry, and Amy joining. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about each of them, and then we'll turn it over to them to tell you a little more about who they are and what they do. So we'll start with Harry. Harry is a senior agriculture policy analyst at the Environmental Policy Innovation Center, where he develops easier, cheaper, faster ways for governments to pay farmers to improve natural resources. He holds degrees in economics and agricultural science from the University of Maryland, College Park, and has worked for a variety of different conservation and ag organizations at the local and national level. So thank you so much, Harry, for joining us tonight. Next, we have Dr. Katharine Dickson, who is a postdoc at the University of California, Davis. Her research expertise lies at the nexus of microbial ecology and bioengineering, focusing on the study of microbial relationships and fiber-degrading microbiomes and the development of methods to modify the metabolism of these microbial communities. And if you are not a microbiologist, don't worry, because I know Katharine's going to break it all down for us in just a moment. Her current work pioneers ways to modify the rumen microbiome of cattle to reduce the 25% of American methane emissions that they produce. She's additionally interested in agriculture-related climate policy to effectively implement technological solutions for greenhouse gas emissions. And last but certainly not least, Amy Brooks Thornton lives and works on her farm in the mountains of Worcester, Vermont, As a single mother of 3 grown children, financial sustainability and health for humans and planet are urgent and essential to her. In the spring of 2023, after discovering that she was highly gluten intolerant and missing the delicious flavor of whole grain toast and all bready things in the morning, as well as cookies for her afternoon break, she undertook a journey to create delicious and nutritious gluten-free baking mixes from ecologically diverse food plants. At the same time, she was beginning to explore the potential for ancient grains to grow on her farm in Worcester, and this passion emerged from her work in regenerative design and biodiverse farming for human and planetary health. So, like I said, we're getting to talk about this topic from 3 different but equally valuable and important perspectives, from the scientific research side, the policy design and analysis, and of course, the people who are actually on the ground growing these foods for us. So I think this is going to be a great conversation. I'm really excited to just jump right in, and we'll ask each of you to tell us a little bit about yourself. Obviously, we know what's in your bio, but tell us what sort of sparked your journey here, and we'll try to keep it brief so we can get to some of the other questions we have in mind. So why don't we go ahead and start with Katharine?
Hey everybody. I'm really excited to talk to you about what I do. So I came into working with climate change relevant research with the rumen microbiome by getting into bioengineering initially. So in graduate school, I moved basically middle of graduate school into a bioengineering lab where the focus actually wasn't as much on climate change as it was on bioproduction. But it one of our big model systems was the herbivore gut microbiome. And so the herbivore gut microbiome, besides, being a very important producer of greenhouse gases, is also home to this incredibly diverse and metabolically very active community of microbes. And so one of the things that it generates is methane, which is a major greenhouse gas, as well as carbon dioxide and hydrogen. But there's also so many other things that are going on behind the scenes that contribute to climate change and are also just really interesting from an industrial standpoint. And so I did my graduate work in more of a bioproduction focused standpoint and just looking at the metabolic relationships in these communities. And it wasn't really until I started my postdoc that I started doing more climate facing research, where I decided I wanted to do something that was more, more directly facing climate change, where I could manipulate the rumen microbiome using, various cutting edge biotechnologies to reduce methane release.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Katharine, and thanks for grounding us in a little bit of why this is so important, kind of in the broader context of the climate work that all of us on this call try to do. So next, let's hear a little bit from Harry. Tell us a little bit more about you.
Sure, I just had to finish my comment in the chat about how cool Katharine's research sounds. But I came to this from being really excited about agriculture. I grew up not on a farm. I'm from Baltimore City originally, but my very first job was working for a farmer who I'd known for a long time at a farmer's market. And there was just something so magical. I mean, whatever can entice maybe slightly hungover high school senior to get out of bed every Saturday in the morning at 5 a.m. and show up and talk to people and get to tell them about food and get to tell them about culture and stories about how excited they can be for this huge aspect of our lives. I mean, food just touches everything. And that made me want to go study agriculture. I kind of thought I was going to just go start my own farm like these folks. And while I really respect anybody who can do that, for me, I think I came to a realization that the ideal I had of like, oh, I'm just going to go start a vegetable farm and I'll make a bunch of money doing that and it'll be a lot of fun, was like based off of this farm that I had worked for that had been in business for 40 some years and had inherited their land. So it's not really realistic for everyone. And after doing that, for studying agriculture and working on farms and working in on-farm research, I kind of stopped to think a little bit more about like, what else am I passionate about? And I've always loved politics and policy as a hobby. And so being able to combine that with my love of farming and food was really just a natural fit. And got to try a lot of different internships and bounced around a little bit and ended up working at Epic, where I really just love my work because it's so focused on how do we make things better and faster? How do we really quickly transform some of our systems that are so broken so that we can meet the urgency of the moment? I love that I get to work on that.
Well, we love that you are working on it, Harry. Thank you so much for that. And Amy, last but not least, tell us a bit more about your story.
Yeah, so I'm probably I've done a lot of pivots. I started as a television news producer for ABC News, World News Tonight, did national news for 10 years in New York City. But honestly, since I was 3 years old, I've been farming. Mom wanted to make sure I knew how to grow a vegetable. So I've been farming since I'm 3. I consider that farming. But yeah, so I just spent 10 years being a news producer, and then I went into education and founded a school. But all along, there's always been this commitment to health for people on planet. So I eventually decided to get my degree in, I thought it was a public health degree at Harvard in the School of Public Health in ecological behavioral health, and didn't like the approach of public health, and because it was always analyzing stuff that already happened, it felt like it was less preventative than it said it was. So I reapplied to the Graduate School of Design at Harvard and studied design there, and it was focusing on risk and resilience. But I became more and more and more I was all living in Vermont at that time and commuting. It was crazy, but I became more and more frustrated by academia, actually. And so even though I ended up graduating from there, and then getting a fellowship to study design at University of Washington, I felt that the real revolutionaries are the farmers, the people who have their hands in the soil or who are connecting people to farming. And I found that in academia, there's a giant urban rural split and divide. And so I started studying design that would connect across different, but I realized that I really need to walk my talk. So I've always had my hands in the soil. I have really gnarly hands. And I was living in Vermont, and an opportunity in 2020 came up to buy this giant dilapidated farm for a song. And I don't have a lot of money. So I was a graduate student. So I figured out the financing and pulled it together and moved into a farmhouse that basically had no heat, no water, no kitchen, and a ton of mice. And yeah, it was kind of almost dangerous to live in, but have been regenerating it slowly and really practicing what I preach. So I'm really, I'm connecting with community here because I have to. And I'm a member of NOFA Vermont, which is the Northeastern Organic Farmers Association. And I am growing cotton medicinal flowers and also ancient grains experimentally, so we can expand food plant diversity, which is really, really, really important globally. And I can speak a ton about that. And I'm really pushing back against a lot of I hate to say it, Harry, but the fast approaches. I don't think fast is good. I'm an anti-capitalist but I can't say that because I buy stuff, so I'm not really. But I think we have to go slow and careful and listen to the old farmers and listen to the land. So anyway, I can speak a ton about that. But yeah, so I have a crazy life, and I also I'm launching a baking mix that supports food plant diversity because it uses teff and amaranth and millet and sorghum, and it's gluten free also. So yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you for giving us a little bit more of a trajectory of where you've been and where you're going and what draws you to this work. It's really, really great to hear that. So now we're going to jump in. I actually think I'm going to go a little bit off script of the questions I had sent you all, because I think it's important, given that we're all kind of coming from these different perspectives, to make sure that we're talking about kind of the same thing. You're all doing really different things. So I'd love to hear, and maybe we'll go Amy first. Tell us a little bit about, how do you define regenerative agriculture, climate smart agriculture? Like, which of those terms resonates more with you from your perspective? Or does neither of them fit and we should be talking about something else entirely? No, it's kind of a meaty question, but I would just love to hear kind of how you think about the work you do in your own words. Oh, and you are on mute still.
I have an issue with any sort of trendy label. So climate smart always feels something happens in me where I'm like rejecting it. Regenerative is a great term if it's used appropriately. Right now, across the United States, like Walmart is advertising regeneratively grown whatever products, and they're using a very toxic chemical, which is glyphosate, which has been banned in Europe, to do what they're calling like carbon smart or climate friendly agriculture, which is no-till agriculture. And it's terrible. It's horrible for the environment. So I really, I'm worried about terms and terminology when it's attached to fast capitalist movements. I think, again, slow is the answer, and really talking to farmers, talking to communities in rural areas where farming exists, and talking about their challenges on the daily basis. And so regenerative is a word that I just would want people, students going into this field, to really think deeply about what it means to regenerate something. A lot of what agriculture is doing right now that's organic is basically almost hydroponic, and they're covering acres and acres with plastic, putting plants down, having them fed very specific nutrients, and then covering that also with plastic. There is zero regenerative about it, but it's being labeled organic and regenerative. So I just would probe deeply into what the meaning of that word is, and make sure that as soon as someone says, fast and tech and just stop them right there and say, have you ever grown anything? Can you grow a tomato? How do you do it? And have you talked to a farmer who's trying to grow tomatoes? And are those birds and bees supported when they're growing those tomatoes? And what about that community? Are we regenerative in our communities also? Because just one last note, there's a lot of opioid addiction in rural America. So when we're talking about regenerative ag, we got to talk about mental health and addiction and all that too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's part of what has brought so much momentum to the term, is that people do kind of see this potential of intersectional work, of really leaning into what does it mean to kind of give back to the earth, give back to community, leave things better than we found it, which is kind of all the promise of regenerative. But as you pointed out, there's always differences in how people think about these words and actually put them into practice. And I know certainly in the policy space, this is something that people spend a lot of time thinking about, like what are the appropriate words to use in this briefing or in this memo. So I'd love to hear, Harry, like how do you approach these different terms? Which one sits best for you in the work that you do?
Yeah, I'd share a lot of Amy's skepticism about some of this stuff. I mean, how we're ever going to produce like climate smart beef from a feedlot kind of blows my mind. That doesn't seem very likely to me. Just like USDA's got this whole climate smart commodities program, in which basically their idea is like you can label your stuff as climate smart and then you get a premium. And that's theoretically, like I understand the concept behind that, but to be like the beef with 30% less emissions is climate smart, like I don't know if I buy that. When you could just eat some lentils, right? Or a Beyond Burger even. But to directly answer your question, I'm very intentional about how I use the term sustainable versus regenerative. And I intentionally don't talk very much terms of sustainable agriculture. I like to use the phrase regenerative, and I think all the caveats that Annie said to that are all true. But the reason that I use that term instead of sustainable is because, like, think there's this sort of old school environmentalist thinking of like, we got to preserve, we got to sustain, we got to not screw things up anymore. And it's like, we're way past that, man. We're so far past not screwing things up. We have to actively, intentionally make things better. And so in my mind, in the long term, sustainable is fine if we're just sustaining, but in the short to medium term, we really need to make things better. We need to regenerate. And I think about that particularly in terms of soil. We're losing huge amounts of topsoil. We as a country are losing huge amounts of topsoil. And so if we just like sustained the amount of topsoil we have, I don't really think that's fair. I don't think that's enough. I don't think that's beneficial. We truly need to regenerate it, to just take one example. But also with any of these, I think we need to think globally, right? When we say sustainable, right? I live in the Chesapeake Bay region. And so there's a lot of focus on like, how do we keep our waterways clean? And that can really easily lead to like, well, let's make it super hard to, let's say, raise chickens here. And then they'll go raise the chickens in rural Arkansas and their water will be dirty instead of ours. And like, that's not fair either. That's not the right way to make something sustainable or regenerative or whatever you want to call it. And that expands, that concept then gets really difficult when we start thinking about some bigger, harder problems, right? Like, okay, say we want to regenerate our layer of topsoil. Is there a trade-off to, we get to regenerate our topsoil here, but maybe in the short term our yields go down some, and that means that an acre of rainforest in Brazil gets plowed up to grow more soybeans. If the, let's say, global market for soybeans or for pork stays the same. So ultimately, regenerative over sustainable, but with any one of these, we need to be thinking about it globally, not just in a, is it regenerative within my little bubble and I'm exporting my problems elsewhere.
Yeah, it's a great point. These are extremely interconnected systems. Katharine, I want to give you a chance to weigh in on terminology, if that feels comfortable, but also you kind of shared a little bit about how you came to the work that you currently do. I'm sure you want to share a little bit more about what you found so far. So yeah, I think let's kind of transition into that direction, but start with, if you do have any really strong opinions about the terminology that you see used kind of among the scientific community, would love to hear that too, in terms of, in the context of the research that you're doing.
So I have to admit, I'm not as familiar with the connotations behind regenerative, climate smarter, sustainable agriculture. I feel like I'm a little bit new to the activism space in a lot of ways, but the way that I approach, I feel like sustainable really resonates best with me. I like to prioritize staying grounded in the best evidence that I have available to me regarding what's sustainable in the long term, not just from the technological standpoint, not just from, the specific system we're working with, but, is it ethical? What are the environmental justice concerns we have to take into account? What are the policy concerns we have to take into account? Because this isn't just a scientific problem. This isn't just a technological problem. This is a very holistic thing we have to approach. And with slow versus fast technology, we hear a lot about tech's problem with wanting to move fast and break stuff, and just actually having, maybe not taking the time needed to really actually figure out, is this solution going to produce the consequences that we're hoping for in the long term? Or is this just wishful thinking on the part of some VC and some founder who, they've seized on something that seems promising, but they're ignoring other voices who might have, there might be a legitimate problem in the long term that they haven't looked at. And so I actually, I would say that I think it's important to just consider how, how deliberate are we being about making these changes. I really resonate a lot with Amy's desire that these changes happen more slowly, or at the very least that we think about, we devote more effort to thinking them through before we actually implement them. And so transitioning into things that I've found so far, oh gosh. I mean, I'm relatively my academic career is pretty young, so a lot of what I did in my doctoral work was looking at how things like how substrate, like the feed that you give to like the host that has this microbial community, how that shapes the community. And oh gosh, I mean, it's hard to sum it up into a couple of sentences, but I basically complex, substrates like alfalfa or, different kinds of mixed feeds are just going to shape a community in ways that reflect the just their very complex chemical composition. And then right now, I also did a little bit of work in primate gut microbiomes, and I looked a little bit at the metabolic relationships in those microbiota, and particularly looking at captive primates. And then I've really just kind of gotten started in the methane mitigation space, and so I guess I don't really have much to share from there, but I'm looking forward to having some interesting results in the near future about what you can sort of see from combining we're looking at CRISPR engineered microbes, and so we're thinking that perhaps upstream, so methanogens, and these are the microbes that actually produce the methane. They only produce it because bacteria and fungi and protozoa upstream of them are producing the ingredients for all of this methane. And so we're thinking, if we can find some way to modify those populations in some fashion, then is that a potential solution we can implement? And so I have yet to see what'll happen there, but I think there's some interesting territory to explore ahead.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that work with us, Katharine. It definitely sounds really exciting, and I like that it's also kind of, I'm trying to weave some of these different themes together, but I like that it's taking this kind of whole system approach to the issue of methane emissions from cattle, and really thinking about what are these different organisms that they're interacting with in their environment that are producing the conditions that then make this such a methanogenic food source, and how can we improve the food system to be able to reduce that impact. So that's really, really interesting to see that that kind of integration happening in that space as well. So I think that's a really great example also of kind of an opportunity that still lies ahead in the field very broadly, just better understanding what are the different interactions, these systems that are at play. So I'd love to hear from Amy, what do you think is like a big opportunity that you see in this work?
Oh my gosh. I think there's so many opportunities. I think Katharine and Harry and I are all doing really good work where tons of opportunities are. I guess I would try them all and see which one suits you best. But I would I think it's really important if you're in policy and in science to also not only get your hands in the ground, but really talk to the struggles and challenges of farmers in rural America, because we know that we're losing 1 million acres of farmland a year in the United States, and we know that we're losing, I don't know what the percentage is, but we're losing farmers really fast. And so if you're going into farming, you're likely to get consolidate, try to go large, try to go big, try to go tech. And that's not the answer, because that's a single point of failure for our food systems, and it reduces agrobiodiversity. So if the question is what, are you saying, Stephanie, what do I suggest? What's the opportunity? I think the opportunity, at least from my perspective, is go and work on a farm. Go work on an organic farm, a real organic farm, because that's an opportunity, so that when you go into science or policy, you understand how hard it is, and you understand the challenges, but you understand also that you can actually, if you do it the right way, and you follow the, I'm in a lot of courses and workshops on how to do it so you can actually make a profit and be regenerative. It can be really satisfying. And at the very least, when you go into policy or science, you're grounded in that reality of what it's like. I think that's a huge opportunity. And I think as we urbanize, students just know less and less and less and less about what it means to be. And that also, I think, solves a political problem in this country, because I live in rural Vermont. Vermont, where I live, is not liberal. There are some liberals here. We call them the neoliberals. It's pretty conservative, and a lot of people have guns, and there's a lot of addiction. So, and there's a lot of hatred toward liberals. So I think that's because they've been left out of the conversation. So there's all sorts of regenerative things that are happening among people and communities that could happen. There's so many opportunities if you work in a rural area on a farm, to understand what's happening, this divide in this country, and to understand how to grow food and understand soil. That I think that's an enormous opportunity before you go do something else and throw up your hands.
Yeah, I really appreciate you taking it to that level also, Avi, and kind of showcasing how this is, again, regenerating communities, regenerating relationships. And that's definitely a big part of our values within Citizens Climate as well, is how do we bridge those divides? How do we bring everybody to the table around climate? And it definitely seems more and more like people are more open to talking about food systems kind of across the aisle. It's definitely something that touches all of us in different ways, but we need more opportunities to interact, like you said, with the people who are working the land directly, and become those people ourselves if we are able to do so, at least for a short period of time, to better understand it. Harry, what do you see as an interesting opportunity in the policy space?
I got 4 words for you: natural resource conservation service. The Natural Resource Conservation Service is the part of USDA that does environmental stuff. And this is maybe not an answer if you guys want, like, here's how you change policy. I can get into that if somebody particularly wants. But if you are asking me, what is the best way to find a job in sustainable agriculture right now, I totally echo Amy's, like, go work on a farm. But for getting a job, once you decide that is what you want to do, either working directly with NRCS, which is trying to hire a bunch of people, or working for a nonprofit that is, or for profit even, that is using these dollars. So here's what you need to know. The Inflation Reduction Act, which I'm sure many of you guys know, is like the most ambitious piece of climate legislation passed in history, had $20 billion for the NRCS. And that was for everything from, like, quantifying if farmers are actually meeting the commitments that have been made at COP for how much they're going to decrease their emissions. But a huge amount of it is actually directly to go out to farmers to implement conservation practices. And I'll be the first to say, like, a lot of this money is not used as well as it could. There can be real environmental justice concerns with it. There can be just ways that it, like, is spent stupidly because like, bureaucracy can work not phenomenally all the time. But one program I want to draw your attention to in particular is called the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. I know I'm throwing a lot of DC heavy names at you guys, but The reason I want to highlight that program in particular is because, yeah, NRCS itself is hiring. They're hiring for thousands of positions, but they've also given $5 billion over the next 4 years to this regional conservation partnership program, which is all about working with partner organizations. That could be your the Rodale Institute, which is like very well known for doing regenerative farming, or it could be something that's like less focused on regenerative farming, like the Iowa Soybean Association, right? But these programs all are, or this program is working with all these different kinds of partners and giving them lots of money to do on-farm conservation. So if you can learn how to do some of that planning, do some of those forms that are hard work but difficult, then you can really easily look for a job in that field, because so many organizations are going to be hiring because there's just so much money available, in addition to working directly for NRCS.
Thank you, Harry. It's great to also have that reminder. We've talked a lot about the Inflation Reduction Act within Citizens Climate in the context of the really direct kind of climate investment and mobilization of funds for things like electrification and transmission, but less so on the agricultural side. So thanks for that reminder that really invested transformative money in other parts of our country. Catherine, I would love to hear, you shared a little bit about an opportunity. So I'm a little curious. You've done the grad school thing, you're a postdoc right now. I'm sure it has not been an easy journey. But I don't want to dwell on challenges too much. So I don't think I'll ask all three of you to share this. But what are some of the challenges you faced, Catherine, in your journey in this field?
Well, I would like to speak to the opportunities first, because
Sure.
these are some that I'm also trying to get into as a postdoc. We can bridge gaps between policymakers and farmers in some pretty important ways. So we're not on the ground as farmers, we're not in the legislature as policymakers, but we've got a different set of skills. We can analyze data. We dig into the molecular biological nitty gritty of everything that's going on. We've got an extension here at UC Davis in the Department of, well, not just the Department of Animal Science, but the College of Agriculture, that helps California farmers all the time. We actually have a lot of local farmers around here. Davis is probably the nerdiest cow town in the United States. And we're right near Sacramento, the capital of California. And we've got a lot of pull with state government and have a huge, huge hand in just making California a leader in cutting edge agricultural practices that are better for our environment. And ultimately, in many ways, we're really important supports for both farmers and government, because we can lend our expertise and, you know, our ability to dig into what's going on at, you know, just multiple levels in the environment, and, you know, help shape help shape policy, help shape new farming practices. And can you remind me what you were, can you remind me of the other question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, just what are some challenges that you've faced?
So challenges that I've faced. I would say graduate school in and of itself is a massive challenge. So it's 5 to 7 years of very hard work. I mean, you know this very well, Stephanie. You're finishing, and congratulations on that. Graduate school is a labor of love in many ways, especially if you're doing a PhD. I strongly recommend that you only do a PhD if what you want to do it with your life requires one. And so I want to do research. I like to do, you know, I want to do microbiome engineering. I want to dig into policy, just, you know, for the rest of my life. And so PhDs also often open doors to leadership in the scientific space as well. A lot of like biotech company heads often have PhDs. If you want to be a professor, obviously you need one. So I would say that, you know, not just graduate school, but also scientific research, taking a project, designing an experiment, coming up with a new idea that nobody's come up with before, because at the graduate level and above, it's all about doing original research. It's all about pushing the boundaries of what we know. And so keeping up with that and really, really pushing the boundaries of what we know is challenging. It can be incredibly challenging, but it's so rewarding. Especially like that moment when you realize you're the first person to know something. It's magic.
That's awesome. And thanks for reminding us of the silver lining, the good moments that happen when you're in the process of pursuing graduate research. So I want to be mindful of time and open it up to questions. So we'll come back to all three of you to share like your very brief, like one sentence advice to anybody who's interested in pursuing this more as a career. But would love to hear from the audience. If any of you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand and I will call on you. Yeah, Stanley.
Wait, I gotta figure out how to turn on my camera. Hold on a second. For those who don't know, I'm having technical difficulties with my laptop, so I'm trying to figure out how to do Zoom on my phone.
I believe in you. You already have your bachelor's, so they must have at least taught you how to use Zoom, right?
Never used it on my phone before. Where are my permissions?
Oh no. Well, if you want to just ask your question, Stanley, we can definitely give you some time to find your camera while we're getting the responses in.
Okay, yeah. So there's this author that I really enjoy reading called Václav Smil. And basically what he argues is that there is so much energy used by plants in agriculture that comes from artificial, like synthesized fertilizers, that like replacing it wholesale with regenerative agriculture is basically unfeasible. Because I don't have a whole lot of understanding in this area, I was wondering if you guys could perhaps speak a little bit more on that.
Generally about the feasibility of transitioning from conventional agricultural systems to regenerative food systems.
But you want to hear specifically about the fertilizer aspect, right, Stanley? Or maybe?
Maybe.
Yeah. So including that too, I guess.
I can speak a little bit to that. I think you have to take a different perspective if you're getting into regenerative agriculture. I think you're feeding, you're trying to feed people, but you're also feeding the planet. So for instance, as I said, like all the organic raspberries and blueberries we're eating now are grown on these giant sheets of plastic in these little pots with cocoa shells in them, and then fed by tubes. And then there's cut plastic over them, and they support nothing except for the plant. And if you take the tube away, the plant will die in a few days. Whereas that same blueberry bush can survive for like a month and a half without in soil, or longer if like it's in drought. So I think it's just a totally different perspective. When you're thinking about regenerative agriculture, you're thinking about a whole system, not just humans. And you're looking at all the organisms and all the beings on the planet and all the, biochemical material out there. Yeah, I that probably doesn't answer your question exactly, but it's a start.
I'll say, I think that really is a very difficult challenge. If we are going, well, let me start off with this. Like the vast majority of agriculture done in the US is to grow plants to make animal products. If everybody overnight just wanted to switch to eating lentils and grains, like it'd be a super easy problem to solve. But given that people probably aren't going to do that, then we need to, it is a hard problem to solve within those constraints. So I think it is something that really smart people are working on. There's a lot of really actually, it's like we talk about, like, we know how to switch over to generating carbon-free electricity. We don't know how to switch to generating carbon-free concrete at scale. Same thing can be said for fertilizers. In a lot of ways, we have some ways that we can produce much lower carbon. I'm saying fertilizers, but like not necessarily chemical fertilizers, things that fertilize. But we don't fully know how to do that at scale. But what I will say to end on a positive note is there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, right? Like, think about how we use water today and how there are huge pastures in California that get totally flooded for water, and like very small parts of that actually is used by the plants. Huge amounts of it evapotranspirate, and we could just like use drip irrigation, and that would solve the problem for water. A lot of that can really be said to be the same for fertilizer. Honestly, I think so much of it, and I'm talking now about chemical, particularly nitrogen fertilizers, but a lot of that, like, it's just farmers waste it because even though it costs money, it doesn't cost nearly as much money as the real cost of it. If you were to factor in the carbon cost, if you were to factor in the cost to our rivers and streams. So like, it sounds a little bit simple, but I think just a Pigovian tax on to account for the externalities of nitrogen fertilizer would be one thing. But of course, that would drive up the cost of food. People would get upset. One other thing that I'm really excited about is opportunities around biologics. And this is really like taking something that's old and doing it in a new way. Regenerative farmers, organic farmers for a long time have known that you want to nurture the microbes in your soil, and that will allow you to get more more nutrients if you're talking about phosphorus out of the soil, or to sequester bring more nutrients into your soil if you're talking about nitrogen. And there are new exciting ways to turbocharge that. It's like, how can we think of it like probiotics, right? Like probiotics for your soil, so that we can get those biological fertilizers to work even better. So there's some bright spots, but that definitely is a really tricky problem considering the constraints we face.
To speak a little bit to, things like, switching to biologics from more inorganic solutions, we're still limited by the laws of physics and chemistry. There's no such thing as a perfect solution. So for example, to draw a comparison to methane mitigation. So there are 4 classes of basic products of anaerobic digestion and enteric fermentation, the entire process that goes on in the rumen. There's methane, there's hydrogen, there's carbon dioxide, and then there's things like fatty acids and other like non-gaseous stuff, a lot of which gets absorbed by the cow. You're not going to be able to get rid of one or all of these components completely. There's no such thing as a perfect solution. What you have to do ultimately is you have to optimize the overall chemical physical equation for the most the best outcome you can get. Any solution that you develop is it's never going to be perfect. And so, like, for example, for fertilizers, if you want to develop like a microbial solution to this problem, you're still going to have to figure out, okay, what does this what does this probiotic do? How does it interact with the environment? It could have, it could have effects that you don't even anticipate. And we can do what we can to try to predict these outcomes. We can, do all the designing and modeling and laboratory testing in the world, but there's still risks. And there's still there's still just thermodynamic and biological limitations. I think fundamentally, one of the things that we have to accept about developing new technological solutions in the climate agricultural space is that we have to have many different kinds of solutions, and we have to accept that there's no such thing as a one size fits all solution, or one that's perfect.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing a little bit there. And again, speaks to the fact that these are really deeply interconnected systems. And Stanley, thanks for the great question. I do want to keep us moving. Unfortunately, if you have additional questions, I'm going to ask our panelists to please share contact information in the chat if they feel comfortable doing so, where folks can reach you if they have any follow-up questions. But I also want to give you all an opportunity, as promised previously, to give us, one piece of advice, one sentence, let's keep it super brief, that you would give to somebody who is interested in further exploring this. And we'll start with Amy. We'll start with you. And you're muted. There you go.
Advice. I think just going off that last question, what I guess I wanted to say is, think about that seventh generation and how, maybe you can feed some people now the right way, not make a lot of money off doing whatever you're going to do, whether it's working in NRCS, being a scientist, being a policymaker, being a farmer. But think about the seventh generation. Don't try to go for I agree with Katharine, there's no one solution. So don't go for the solution, maybe even in your lifetime, but start building the solution. Like you're building the soil and you're building the plants and you're building and you're regenerating a farm or a piece of land, maybe for the next person, the next person, the next person, the next being, and the next being, and the next being. And talk to old people, talk to old farmers, like really old ones, like ones are like in their 90s. They have a lot of wisdom, especially the women.
Thank you, Amy. Harry, any parting words of wisdom and advice?
Yeah, the advice that I always love to give to young folks interested in policy is to find sign-on letters. This is something that all sorts of advocacy policy organizations do. They'll like write a letter that says, Chairwoman Stabenow of the Senate Agriculture Committee, please, don't cut funding for climate smart agriculture, whatever. And then they'll go and get like 50 or 100, or this one I'm thinking of got 643 organizations to sign on. So go find those sign-on letters that are about things you care about. And then you have a list of 643 organizations that also care about something you care about. Plop them all into an Excel spreadsheet, have links to their websites to get the internship, to get the job, and then just check that list every week. Boom, you have a list. You can very easily run through and see a ton of organizations that care about things you care about and check on if they're hiring. You probably do a way to automate it even faster than that, but that's incredibly useful for this particular sphere.
That's a great pro tip. Thank you, Harry. Katharine.
So I feel like the advice I have is a lot more basic in a lot of ways, regardless of the path that you decide to take with anything climate related. Never give in to fatalism. If you give up looking for a solution, or if you give up looking for the right path to do climate work or pretty much anything else, you've kind of already lost. I think a lot of the best solutions really require a lot of creativity, and sometimes we're really the most creative when we're forced to be. And ultimately, I think this advice applies really well, not just to the climate space, but to pretty much everything else in life. So if you're going to be one of those people who's kind of a doomer about the climate and you're ready to throw up your hands, the world's going to burn. No, don't do that. Don't do that. There might be something else around the corner, and you're not going to find it if you throw your hands up.
Definitely got it. Keep pushing, keep moving. Thank you to all three of you for sharing your experience, your wisdom and insights. This is really informative. I know I definitely learned a lot. And I hope people will take you up on the opportunity to connect after the fact if they have further questions. I would love to do, before the three of you run off, I'd love for us to take a group photo for our socials. So if you are not on camera and would like to be included in the group photo, please take this opportunity to come back on camera. I'll give you all a minute to do that and fix your hair. Do what you gotta do. Beautiful. Okay. I think that's everybody who's coming on. All right, so 1, 2, 3. All right. Yes, we got it. Thank you so much. Thanks to everybody for joining. We are going to have a few more updates, so please stick around if you're here for the action teams call to hear those updates. But Harry, Katharine, Amy, it was a pleasure, and I will love to let you get back to your busy nights. Thank you again for spending some time with us.
Thank you. That was great. Really enjoyed it.
It was a pleasure, everybody. Lovely to
Bye.
meet you.
You too. All right, so there are a ton of other things on the action sheet that we will not get to do together. I do want to just point out, related to the topic we were talking about tonight, Eco Farm is an annual conference around sustainable agriculture. And they actually have work trade opportunities. So if you are interested in exploring this further and you would be willing to do a little bit of work to support that conference, I definitely encourage you to look it up, and that information is in the action sheet. But without taking any more time at all, I'm so sorry, Emily. Time really got away from us today. Would you like to share any updates from CFD?
There aren't really any national updates at this very moment, but I know we're running out of time, so it would be wonderful if people who had updates from the locally would be able to share. But I also know, I don't know, it's hard with the time right now, but
Yeah. No, I understand, and I'm definitely I'll be staying on for some time after. So for anybody who wants to hang out, we have a little bit of a culture here of staying on after the end of the call. So definitely would love to hear that. But if anybody's got a really exciting update that they'd like to share, I think we can make time in these last couple minutes. There's nothing more important than hearing from you all. So yeah, if you'd like to share an update, let's hear it. And if not, seeing no takers, Emily, do you have a success story you'd like to share that you know of?
Well, at William and Mary, we've been at the past couple of meetings making TikToks for the CFD movement and William and Mary at CCL, and those have been doing fairly well on Instagram, and it's really exciting to us because I feel like that's something that we haven't seen a lot of yet, like CCL TikToks. So
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for doing that and spearheading that. I also just realized Serena shared her update in the chat that their chapter is officially starting in January. So congratulations, we're going to have an active group at Michigan State. I think that's right. Serena will correct me in the chat if not, but I'm pretty sure that's right. So lots of really exciting things going on. We are hoping in early 2024, so sometime in the first couple of weeks of January, to have a call for college students all across the country and college student aged folks all across the country, including our campus leaders, our CFD leaders, everybody who's involved with us in some way, to come together. And the entire purpose of that call will just be to get to know each other. We're also going to be shifting our structure a little bit more for these calls to make sure we have more time for updates like these. So please stay tuned, stay involved. The last thing I wanted to make sure everybody was aware of in line with this is that we do have a feedback form. So if there is anything you'd like to see more of or less of from the action team, please do give us feedback in that form. I check that every single week, at a minimum once a week, sometimes more frequently if my anxiety is acting up. So please let me know how we could do better, because our goal is to serve you. So with that, we are exactly at time. Like I said, we'll stay on a little bit after, but I know it's final season. So to all of you who carved out an hour of your time when you could have been studying for exams or doing final projects, thank you. Thank you for that. Your time is super appreciated. And we'll let you get back to it, and best of luck in all ahead through the end of the year. It was great to see everyone.
Have a good night.